Lesi isikhathi sokuthandaza ngesitu noma sokuzidla. Siyathokoza, ngahlala phasi. Order, honorable members, if you may take your seats. Honorable members, the House is in session. Can we take our seats? Thank you. Firstly, honorable members, I wish to announce the vacancy which occurred in the National Assembly owing to the resignation of Ms. V. Ketabahle has been filled by the nomination of Y.N. Yako with effect from the 3rd September. You are welcome, Honorable Yako. Thank you very much. Secondly, honorable members, we have a vacancy again, which occurred in the National Assembly owing to the resignation of Mr. I.M. Ollis, which has been filled by the nomination of Mr. M.S. Shackleton with the effect from the 1st of September. Is Mr. Shackleton there? Where? That's not the nice thing for the first day. Mr. Shackleton,
Chair.
you're welcome.
Mr. Shackleton must be referred to the Ethics Committee. Ethics Committee, Chief. Huh?
And lastly, honorable members, the vacancy which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Ms. Z. Youngblood has been filled by the nomination of Mr. J. Lont with effect from the 7th of September. You are also welcome. Thank you. I really welcome you, all of you honorable members, to the National Assembly and Parliament. The first item on the order paper is a motion in the name of the Chief Whip of the Majority Party, the Honorable, the Chief Whip.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, we move that this House suspends Rule 137, which provides inter alia that there may only be one discussion in terms of this rule on a sitting day, for the purpose of allowing the following debates on the 12th of September 2018. The first debate is ideas for economic revival following a recession, which comes from the leader of the opposition. The second one, debate in terms of Rule 130, escalating fuel prices, from Honorable M. Hlengwa. I so move.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. I now put the motion. Are there any objections to the motion? No objection, agreed to. The second motion on the order paper is also in the name of the Chief Whip of the Majority Party. Honorable Chief Whip.
Thank you, House Chair. We move that the House notes the letter by the President of the Republic of South Africa, tabled on 10 May 2018, announcements, tablings, and committee reports regarding the filling of vacancies in the Commission for Gender Equality, and 2, establishes an ad hoc committee to identify suitable candidates for the filling of vacancies in the Commission in terms of the revised Commission for Gender Equality Act, which came into effect on the 26th of November 2013. The committee 2A consists of 11 members as follows: ANC 6, DA 2, EFF 1, and other parties 2. B, exercise those powers in Rule 167 that may assist in carrying out its task. C, recommend, when necessary, which commissioners should be appointed as full-time commissioners and which should be appointed as part-time commissioner. And D, report to the Assembly by not later than the 16th of November 2018. I so move, House Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. I now put the motion. Are there any objections? No objections agreed to. Thank you, honorable members. The next item on the order paper is the debate on an urgent matter of national public importance in terms of Rule 130 in the name of Mr. J S Malema on the plight of the fees must fall activities. Honorable members, I've been informed that Honorable Dr. Ndlozi will take charge of the order in terms of Assembly Rule 93. Honorable, I now recognize you, Honorable Dr. Ndlozi.
Thank you, Chairperson of the House. Since the founding days of industrial colonial capitalism, this country has always hated, despised, and neglected the black youth. Already in the 1940s, the colonial regime had painted the black youth as delinquent, idle, and dangerous. The section of the black population that apartheid hated the most were the black youth, in particular, black youth activists. This image of the black youth as dangerous found renewed emphasis in the early 1990s following the return of the liberation movement. In those days, the black youth were called the lost generation, even by many in the liberation movement. Ask yourself, why was the ANC's first statement on the 1976 Soweto uprising was to condemn the students, call on all of them to go back to school? Why would the ANC's first reaction to the youth uprising be to condemn it in 1976? It is because essentially, the 1976 youth were above everything else an abandoned generation, abandoned by its elderly and parents. More than 30 years later, the ANC has sustained this very attitude towards the black youth, in particular the activists of the Fees Must Fall movement. Through its ministers, the ANC sent police to campuses, condemned students, painting them as being used by the CIA, and called on their arrest. To this day, ANC government continues to hold many of them in prisons 3 years after the Fees Must Fall movement in 2015. So we have to just ask a simple question. In fact, even after society accepted the moral power of Fees Must Fall demands, the security and disciplinary apparatuses of the ANC government still take pleasure in arresting, persecuting, and expelling student activists from the universities. We know of Amos Alma Monareng, a second-year informatics student at the University of Pretoria, arrested in 2016, is at home serving a 2-year house arrest sentence. Kaya Cegesha, Yolanda Djanji, Surprise Silowe, Wandile Masango, Tulani Masilela, Mangaliso Sambo are all expelled or in prison or facing trial, sent there by the ANC government. Many hypocrites will take platform and tell us about destruction of property, destruction or disruption of exams, infringement of individual conveniences, calling them individual rights, and the rule of law. They will speak of these ideals as fundamentals of our Constitution, but they deliberately ignore the hard truth that all these rights were brought by destruction of property, infringements of individual conveniences called rights, like the rights of white people to move freely in town at night without black people under apartheid, and breaking the rule of law. Even well-established democracies, celebrated democracies like America and France, in fact, worse for them, their democracies were not brought by protest or civil rights movements. They were brought by war. Men and women carrying guns sewn into killing people. Before you stand here today to tell us about the rule of law, think. think very hard and think very properly about this constitution that you're going to defend here, that it is the constitution fundamentally brought by people who had gone to war, who had gone to soar, and make sure that they come into the country and liberate all of us by breaking apartheid laws. Had you focused on your responsibility to secure a future for the black youth, there wouldn't have been a fees must fall. Instead, you came here to Parliament to sleep, filling your bellies with resources that you were looting in state coffers, bloody sleepists. Had you come here to work, fees must fall would have not happened. Had you come here to become the parents whose role and responsibility is at all times to secure a future for the young, you would have known that you have to prepare universities so that they are accessible, particularly for the black, talented youth. Instead, you came here to sleep. We're therefore calling on all charges and sentences against fees must fall activists to be dropped with immediate effect, particularly by the universities that have expelled all these activists. Let all those expulsions fall. Allow the children to come back and focus on their studies in the attainment of education. The same way you freed Nelson Mandela, who was arrested in possession of explosive and guns, who had sworn as an MK commander to kill people. The same way you were willing to release him from prison, calling him a freedom fighter, you must free all fees must fall activists from prison unconditionally. They never killed anybody. They never tried to kill anybody. They were fighting for access to education. Stop criminalizing them. Let them go back to school and attain education. These are not criminals like Duduzane Zuma, Mtutuzi Manana, or Andile Lungisa, or potential criminals like some ministers here who are serving in the cabinet of Tumamina. They are freedom fighters who were simply seeking the attainment of economic freedom in their lifetime.
You, Honorable
That is why the EFF is the only organization that has assisted them to fight in all the legal battles that they faced.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Mpumlwana, you are next.
Thank you. Somlomo bekekileyo amalungu alendlu ahloniphekileyo.
Order, honorable members, can we listen to the speaker on the podium?
Nesizwe ngokubanzi esindilisekileyo bhotani. Lo mba singawo namhlanje unzulu yaye umbaxa. Phambi koba ndinabe mowethu ndivumeleni ndiqale ndicacise nyewe.
Honorable Khawla, take your seat, Honorable Mpumlwana. Honorable Khawla, what are you rising on?
Speaker, can we be taken serious? We've just given you a high note with the doctor. Can we get a doctor here?
That's not a point of order. Please, let's not waste time. Honorable Mpumlwana, continue.
Universities and colleges, mainly those that were previously meant for whites only, increased their fees exorbitantly. Thus, poor students, mainly Africans, were indirectly excluded from education because of their poverty. This, of course, is contrary to the ANC policies, which promotes free education for all citizens. This is evidenced by the provisions of the Clause 8 of the Freedom Charter, which were inserted by the ANC into Section 29(1)A and B of the Constitution, as well as various conference resolutions of the African National Congress. Students then try to bring their problems to the attention of the government by marching from various campuses. Unfortunately, during these marches, properties were burnt and or destroyed. According to the Minister of Higher Education, the damage caused is about 880 million rand, which is almost $1 billion. This, of course, is a setback. However, the ANC has not diverted from its noble cause. The ANC government has begun implementing free education. Free higher education is provided to students from poor and working class background. Thus, students whose joint annual family income is below 351,000 per year will receive a bursary grant from government, which includes tuition, accommodation, transport, books, and food allowance. The policy will target the first-year students in 2018 and reach all levels in 5 years. This year, 240,000 students will benefit. The government has also made 2.4 billion rands available for infrastructure at universities, prioritizing accommodation and teaching facilities. We are here dealing with future leaders, societies. There must be culture of respect, patriotism, and appreciation of what the country is doing for them, irrespective of the pressure they are in. We cannot allow students to burn libraries and buildings or assault or murder people just because they don't have money to pay for school fees. The ANC is the parent of all South Africans. It has always been and will continue to provide society with all its needs. It is irresponsible.
Order, Honorable Ndlozi. Honorable
It is irresponsible
Ndlozi.
for political parties to use the plight of students to score political points. We are here building a nation, and the young people should participate in that. They should preserve and not destroy the nation. Kunyanzelekile sibonise umkhombandlela. Kunyanzelekile.
Honorable members, I think we listened to
Siyazi.
Dr. Ndlozi speaking. Let's give him a chance. Honorable members, please. Continue.
We cannot call a president and tell the nation that one can do anything because he's young. There are people who are not students who commit crimes. What must we do? Forgive them because they are students, and don't forgive the others because we are not students. Surely, kunyanzelekile sibe umkhombandlela. ANC is a leader of government. ANC is a leader of the nation. It has brought us here for so long. We're involved in the liberation to bring this country where it is. We'll continue to lead the people in the correct direction. Crime is crime, irrespective of who does it. Secondly, we cannot create a precedent of intervention. How can the government come and tell the prosecuting authorities, don't prosecute that one? How can the government say, don't take this one, please forgive this one? Why? Kaniyeke bantakwethu zikhona into ezibalulekileyo sinixabisile. Zikhona into ezibalulekileyo eninolwela zona. Kodwa le aninawuze nithi abantu nisebenzise for ucampaigner. It is irresponsible of you. You can't tell students that they can go and burn libraries, do everything, and yet, because they will be forgiven. Each time, how do you burn a library and you expect to go and study next day? Go back to school. How do you do that? Surely, asakhi sizwe bantakwethu ngolo hlobo. Ndiyanicela. Diabulela.
Siyabulela Advocate Mpumlwane. The Honorable Professor Bizoli.
What are the duties of citizens in a democratic order? Once we have a democratic state, which may have been brought about through violence, it's made up of institutions which allow citizens rather than dictators to govern, but which disallows them from imposing their views upon each other through violence. That is the whole point of having fought for a democracy. The rule of law, much as you might despise it, Dr. Ndlozi, protects us from our own and others' worst instincts, while providing a series of procedures created by the representatives of the people through legitimate means which govern our behavior. Thus, the law is fundamental to democracy. Without the rule of law, we are simply a mass of individuals who, when we disagree with one another, may fight to the death to impose our will. You see this in failed states where people are effectively governed by warlords. Many hundreds of violent students, including Fees Must Fall activists, have undoubtedly broken the law. Over the past 3 years, violent and destructive student protests have cost the fiscus at least 800 million rand. Many of them have had legitimate grievances. Universities have been underfunded. NSFAS has been inadequate and incompetent. Accommodation is often appalling, and many others. We in the DA have fought hard for improvements in all these areas, but the violence has been an illegitimate and minority response. Here are some examples. CPUT has lost 45 million, security control office and sports hall set alight, auditorium damaged, financial aid office gutted, and staff cars stoned. CUT, 54 million, damage to substation, property and vehicles. NMU, 20 million, one building burnt down, another damaged by fire, one petrol bombed, windows smashed and walls damaged. NWU has lost 49 million, Mafeking campus set alight. Stellenbosch has lost 21 million. Administration blocked Chamber of Mines building, community services and residences vandalized. TUT has lost 47 million. Dining hall set alight, building burnt down, windows smashed, fire extinguishers discharged, concrete and steel fencing damaged, residence doors and windows smashed. UCT has lost 2.5 million, unique artworks, a vehicle and the Vice-Chancellor's office set alight. Fort Hare has lost 8.2 million, staff centre burnt down, buildings vandalised and looted, and student centre vandalised. UJ has lost 144 million, lift, guardhouse, students' bus, main auditorium, small auditorium, classroom, storeroom, restrooms, set alight and vandalised. Residences vandalised, fire extinguishing equipment stolen or damaged. UKZN has lost 103 million, buildings set alight and vandalised, including the administration building, residences, the Law Library, which was fully destroyed with all of its precious contents. Limpopo has lost 7 million, damage to lecture halls and administration buildings. UNISA 7.2, chemistry laboratory burnt, buildings vandalised and cars damaged. Dispatch department looted. Free State 8 million, building torched. UWC 63 million, multiple buildings burnt. Zululand 49.5 million, library, bookshop, residences, water pipes vandalised, police vehicle and staff vehicles set alight. VUT 24 million, CCTV cameras and gates broken, buildings burnt and vandalised, residences burnt, mattresses burnt, cafeteria burnt. VITS 29 million, buildings and residences vandalised and damaged. This litany of destructiveness, violence and mob action is a national scandal. Precious places have been destroyed against the interests of the very students themselves, including libraries, bookshops and the places where students live. Precious, unique works of art have been burnt and our heritage compromised, with our most eminent photographer, the late David Goldblatt, sending his collection out of the country because he was no longer able to trust that it would be protected at our leading university. The logical thing to do in such a situation is to arrest and charge those who have done these things. But somehow this rarely seems to happen. Why? Some students have become racketeers. The protection racket is this. Stake a claim, say for exams to be postponed or something. If the claim is refused, engage in violence, bring classes to a halt, paralyze the institution, break the institution's rules and perhaps the law, get arrested or disciplined by the institution, carry on being violent, Then say you will stop the violence if your demands are met and the students being charged are released and those being disciplined are not subjected to discipline. Martyrs are created and sympathy for them is engendered. At this point, the initial demands are met. The students are not charged or disciplined and the situation calms down, at least until the next demand is made. However, vice-chancellors and the broader society are increasingly refusing to engage in this mafia-like racket. On occasion, we find that charges are being laid and not dropped. Disciplinary cases are going ahead. Demands are not being met in the face of blackmail. And for the first time in many years, students engaging in illegal acts may actually be jailed. And so the racket is now playing itself out on a national stage. We now see the Minister of Justice being drawn into unseemly bargaining with students charged with serious crimes. We see a political party, itself a sort of glorified student movement, trying to turn these students into martyrs and bringing their situation to Parliament.
For a glorified
It may
nationalist
well
party.
be that the
Glorified
ritualized
nationalist
pattern of
party.
violence
Nazi party.
Point
in
of
fact.
order.
Honorable Ndlozi.
Nazis, the glorified Nazism party.
Honorable Professor Bizoli, please take your seat. Honorable Ndlozi, you know very well that what you are doing is not allowed. You don't just stand up and take the mic and speak. Okay, don't do that again.
It may well be
Continue.
that the ritualized pattern of violence, blackmail, and concession will itself play out on a national stage. We don't know what students are threatening to do if they are not excused. But whatever it is part of an ugly, undemocratic game which we should have no part of. As a result of these poisonous games, intangible as well as material damage has been done. Universities have become unpleasant places. The job of Vice-Chancellor has become deeply unattractive. Academic staff are demoralized. The profession is emotionally taxing. Professor Bongani Mayosi might be the most prominent victim of these Red Army tactics, but there are many others left traumatized by their experiences in universities. And the hundreds of thousands of students today and tomorrow who want no part of the violence and whose futures depend on their studies are the ultimate losers. Campuses are closed for weeks at a time. Universities claim to have caught up the time, but this is implausible in most situations. University education is in decline. Education itself, and not only the buildings in which it takes place, has been damaged. It is these present and future students we ought to be thinking and caring about, the vast majority. We cannot allow the rule of law to decay or our society and education to disintegrate, however much the EFF might want it. This Parliament must be able to say to future generations that we protected them and that we did not allow their futures to be destroyed. It is for their sakes that violence and mob rule must be brought to an end and legitimate grievances handled in a peaceful, democratic manner. Thank you.
Siyathokoza mhlonishwa. Ilunga elilandelayo umhlonishwa Hlengwa.
Honorable House Chairperson, the rule of law by its very definition clearly states that all persons, institutions and entities are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated and equally enforced. Chairperson, while the actions and convictions of the student activists are in fact the reason the government eventually announced free higher education for poor and working class students, and no doubt many are grateful for it, we simply cannot ignore the millions of rands in damages to state-owned property, which is in fact against the law and therefore punishable offenses. The simple law of physics is that for every action, there's a reaction. They took action and now they have to face the reaction. It's quite simple like that. Rights come with responsibilities, and the right to protest is not a free license to destroy. Libraries were burnt, buildings were destroyed, and cars vandalized. So before we engage in the calls for amnesty, we must first and foremost engage the debate of accountability. The calls for amnesty are justified, but they do not exist in a vacuum, and it must be put in its proper context. We must separate the issues of protest from the issues of criminality. The two should not be conflated. From this very podium, the IFP warned during the times of fees must fall that we must not allow violence to be the hallmark of a legitimate student protest for a legitimate cause, because violence is regressive. But House Chairperson, having said that and speaking about accountability, it would be remiss of us not to mention that the fundamental reality that is facing students now is rightly justified to be raised, because accountability in South Africa is selective. Whether you look at Marikana, to Life Estimeni, to Nkandla, we are seeing now currently a situation of a state pulling out a hammer to hit a fly where it was unable to do so for the bigwigs. Therefore, students may be rightly aggrieved to feel that they are a soft target of a state pretending to be macho and pretending to be doing something about accountability, whereas the trend has been contrary to that reality. So the macho stance at this point in time is a farce. Therefore, Honorable House Chairperson, let us allow the due processes of the law to run their course without interference and allow it to arrive at a logical and legal conclusion so that we do not set into motion precedents which are not substantiated in law. Akhona ehlathini la, umthetho. Let us allow umthetho to run its course. I thank you.
Sithokoze Mhlonishwa. The next speaker is supposed to be from the NFP, so the slot is taken. Honorable Nkwankwa. Qhubeka ba.
Thank you very much, House Chair. Franz Fanon once said, every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, and once that is done, do two things: fulfill it or betray it. These fees must fall activists did exactly that. They discovered that their mission was to ensure fee-free higher education during their lifetime. And to a large extent, they've managed to achieve that. I hear people who talk about violence. I agree, we cannot condone violence. I mean, that is a no-brainer. But we also need to consider the context in which those acts of violence occurred. You cannot deny that the government at the time and during those protests had taken leave of its sense of decency in how it dealt with the students. And as we speak, even some of the students consider the value of education, firstly, at an individual level, and secondly, at a macro societal level, to say, would it not help us at this point in time to consider indeed, or rather to say, the people of South Africa should unite in support of the plea for amnesty for the fees must fall activists who found themselves on the wrong side of the law and thus are currently facing charges in various courts in the land. It is important, we want to underscore as the UDM that we are not in favor of the blanket approach. It should be a case-by-case approach, because there were instances, there were criminal elements that took advantage of the fees must fall activists, and some of those people were students who were not interested in the cause of fighting for a better education system and trying to improve access for the black child to higher education, but they had their own agendas. It must be a matter of deep humiliation and shame for us that the people who made this fee-free higher education that the ANC is beating its chest about are still, some of them, languishing in jail. Others have been expelled from universities. They cannot finish their degrees. Those who have finished their degrees have criminal records and therefore cannot be able to participate in the labor market. It's not the ANC that made fee-free higher education possible. It's the fees must fall activists. Masinixele inyaniso, uba niyithandi niye kuzixhoma. It's as simple as that. It would not be fair to speak about this free higher education without considering the benefits of higher education for all of us. In fact, let me put it this way. It's like those people who celebrate about having sunshine, who bask in sunshine and who make merry in the sunlight and try to claim credit for the sunshine and the sunlight that they didn't bring. It's exactly what the African National Congress is doing. President Zuma wayihijacka le issue kula Congress yenu kuba efuna uzishinise elungisela uNDZ. Niyenzile ngoku nishiya abafundi ngaphandle niqhubeka nodwa amasela.
Sithokoze Mhlonishwa Vessels.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Chairperson, the plight of the students because of financial exclusion is a legitimate plight. But we can never condone violence and lawlessness. If you break the law, you should bear the consequences. No matter how noble.
Order,
the cause
honorable members, I
is.
can't hear the member on the podium. Continue,
Chairperson.
honorable Vessels.
Chairperson, it is unacceptable that irreplaceable books, paintings, buildings, and so forth was destroyed during these protests. This did not serve the goal of obtaining free higher education. It was detrimental to that goal. 800 million rand, Honourable Ndlosi, could have funded 8,000 students to obtain a degree. 8,000 students. But that was destroyed by lawlessness. But the EFF does not understand that because they are still in a revolution. That party you missed, the revolution is over. We need restoration, not a revolution. We need to build this country. And what you are preaching is breaking down and destroying the
Honourable
country,
Vessels.
which is not. in the-
Honorable Vessels,
On a
please
point
take
of
your
order.
seat. Yes, why are you rising, honorable member?
This member keeps on pointing at us and saying that we do not need a revolution. we need
Honorable
restoration.
member,
Of course, we need the restoration of the land.
what is
without
your point of
compensation.
order? That's a point of, you are
He's
debating.
addressing us. He's supposed to address the House.
Okay, thank you.
And we
That's
are
the point
emphasizing
of
that we
order
of
we'll
course need
accept.
the restoration of
Thank
the
you.
land.
No, don't debate, honorable member. Thank you very much. Honorable Vessels, please continue, and
Chairperson.
you have heard.
It is unfortunate when some members' minds are behind bars. The problem is that the tendency
Point of order.
is to break down when someone
Honorable
is unhappy.
Vessels, please take your seat. On what rule are you rising, honorable member?
It's a point of order, Chair. Isn't it true that an empty vessel makes the loudest noise?
Honorable member, no, that's not a point of order, and we can't continue like that. Continue, honorable Vessels.
And if you strike a full vessel, you won't move it. Honourable Chairperson, the tendency to destroy is not limited to feast must fall. And it's also not only the EFF that's preaching lawlessness. It's also the members of the ruling party, their alliance partners, that has had that tendency for years. When members of the ANC in a municipality are unhappy, they burn. They burn houses, they burn constituency offices, they burn the mayor's house, and then it's factions within the ruling party. That is lawlessness and anarchy. We cannot build a country and be economic viable if we continue on this trend. Chairperson, the Honourable Ndlosi is correct. These students do not fall in the same category of criminals as Dlunzana Zuma and so forth. And also not in the same category of the Honourable Malema, who with his former comrades stole money which could have funded free higher education. It is the corruption of people like J S Malema and comrades in the ANC that are stealing the money
Point of
from
order.
Honorable
the
Vessels,
students and
please
the poor.
take your seat. Yes, honorable member.
Can you please tell that man
Honorable,
not
what
to
you are,
call
honorable,
the CIC Julius Malema is Honorable Julius Malema. Tell him.
honorable member, every member of the House should be referred to as an honorable. Please continue.
I said
On a
honourable,
point
but
of
I'll say
order,
dishonourable this time.
On a point of order, Chairperson,
Yes, honorable member.
that member must withdraw whatever you have said about the Commander-in-Chief. He knows as well, he must bring a substantive motion to the House. He must withdraw. Otherwise, he won't continue speaking there. on that
Honorable member, you have made your point. Don't give rulings. Honorable member, you know that to bring any aspersions, you have to bring a substantive motion. And in this instance, you said a member of this House had looted. And please withdraw from that.
Thank you, Chairperson. Unfortunately, I cannot withdraw the truth. It is the dishonorable Malema who stole the money from the students.
Honorable members.
The poor as a plight. You are not interested in the plight of the poor. You're only...
Honorable vessels, we are working according to the rules in this house. I ask you to withdraw that part. I'm asking you to withdraw the part. It's on here. Continue.
Please call the bouncers to take this man out. Call the
Honorable member, wait, Honorable Dlamini, let me talk to Mr. Vessels. Honorable Vessels, please withdraw and we can go on with the work.
For the first time, the second time, and the third time, I cannot withdraw the
If
truth.
you cannot withdraw, would you please leave the podium? Thank you.
He must go to Orania from here. Go to Orania.
Honorable Lekota, you are the next.
He must leave the house.
Point of order.
Honorable Lekota, please. No, they're leaving.
Point of order.
He knows he has to. Honorable, yes, honorable member.
House Chairperson, the rules must apply consistently. If you're going to ask the Honourable Vessels for leaving for what he said, to have this group of people shouting, go to Orania, etc., is not parliamentary either. And you must ask them to
Unfortunately, I
withdraw.
didn't even hear that. Thank you
That's
for
the problem.
that.
It's always the opposition.
No, I didn't hear that, Honorable, and nobody stood on a point of order.
Order, Chair.
Please take your seats, Honorable members. I've ruled.
Chair.
Take your seats.
I just want to get it clarity. Who's a group of people here? We are honorable members here in this house. Who's a group of people here? We must not be undermined here. We must not be
Honorable
undermined
members,
here.
I think I have ruled. Please take your seat. Honorable Stenay said I have ruled.
House Chairperson, a group of people...
Honorable
are not
member,
honourable when
I
they-
didn't ask you to respond. I didn't ask you to respond. Take your seat. Can we allow Honorable Lekota to continue? Honorable Lekota? Honorable Lekota, please continue.
Madam Chairperson.
Order, honorable members. Allow Honorable Lekota to make his speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. My understanding is that we are debating here whether we should give a blanket amnesty to those who were arrested for the violence that erupted around the fees must fall. The first point I'd like to make is that in both national and international law, amnesty is generally granted to those who have already been convicted of proven crimes. So it's not possible to give somebody amnesty unless you have proven that they have committed a crime. When it comes to the individuals who have been convicted, it's going to be important to evaluate each case on its merits. So these two elements are important to take into account as we deal with this matter. Now, I would like to take some lessons from the history of our country. As we struggled under apartheid, we had no political rights. We had no political rights. And therefore, it often did happen that genuine protest spilled over into violent activities.
Honorable Ndlozi, please.
Nevertheless, we insisted and our leadership insisted, both at home, on Robben Island and abroad, that when you struggle for a just cause, you must do so in a disciplined fashion. So it was very important. I was arrested for transgressing the laws of apartheid. What I didn't do was to struggle. Is it a parliamentary that when I'm speaking?
Honorable member.
Point of order.
Thank you, Honorable.
Sorry, House Chair. This will carry on for a moment longer.
Can I hear what is the point of order?
The Honourable Ndlozi just said to the Honourable Lekota, you are lying.
Honorable
Now, since the
Lekota.
beginning of this
Thank you.
debate,
Thank
the
you.
EFF have held and harangued every
Honorable
single
member,
speaker
can you
down.
allow me? I've heard your point
I haven't
of
finished
order.
my point of order, actually.
Honorable Lekota, Honorable Lekota, did you hear that?
I heard it.
Okay. Honorable Ndlozi, did you say Honorable Lekota was lying?
No. No.
Honorable members?
You say no. Madam Chair.
Okay. Honorable Steenhuisen, either the table staff did not hear that, either myself. That's why I'm asking you that please try to be quiet so that I can hear what's happening in the House. On this point, I am done, and I'm saying if it's possible that it can be heard from the handset, it is fine, we will follow up on it. Because neither myself nor the service officer heard that remark. Continue, Honorable Lekota.
Madam Chair, the point I was making is that even in those circumstances, continuously, as the leadership of the mass movement in the country, we had the duty to continuously say to our followers and supporters, please not to break the law, because that is what we were taught how to lead the people in struggling. You want support, you want mass support. When the community looked and saw that what you were struggling for was a just cause, and you were doing it in a manner that enhanced the position of the organization. It is for that reason, by the way, that the late President Oliver Tambo went to sign the Geneva Conventions to show that the liberation movement was a disciplined force that would act within accepted revolutionary action as opposed to terrorist activity.
At that point, we want to thank you, Honorable Lekota. Your time has expired.
I thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Honorable Ramatlakane.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. The ANC support the rights of all citizens and inhabitants of South Africa to a protest which is peaceful. The ANC adopted resolution on free education, and Polokwane Conference affirmed this position, which is this position that the hypocritical parties want to hijack as their own policies today. The African National Congress wants to support our support to legitimate call of free education by a Fuse Must Fall movement for free education. However, we do not agree on the methods of violence and damage to property. It is this call which the African National Congress, this call that was made back in 1955 in terms of the Freedom Charter, and I quote, that the door of learning and culture shall be open, education shall be free, compulsory, universal, and equal for all the children. Higher education, technical training shall be open to all by means of a state allowance and scholarship awarded on the basis of a merit, close quote. We are constitutional democracy. With the Constitution as a supreme law, any conduct which is inconsistent and with the Constitution is invalid, and of course, the state has an obligation to protect its citizens against such a violation within a democratic institution operating within the parameters of our Constitution and rule of law. Section 29(1), Bill of Rights of our Constitution, which states that which is the basis of our laws, also clearly spell out the responsibility of government on education. And I quote, that everyone has the right to a basic education, including adult basic education, and a further education, which the state, through its reasonable measures, must make progressive resource accessible. The principle of free education is well established, and we do not want to question the legitimate call and articulated by a campaign of free must fall campaign movement. However, having said this, we are also aware of number of free must fall activists who has in fact not respected the convention of protest in South Africa. Our constitution provides that everyone has the right to peaceful and unarmed, to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and present petitions. The Fees Must Fall movement protested, and their protests were heard by a majority of South African government. One pillar of the NDP said, and I quote, "People living in South Africa feel safe at home, at school, at work, and enjoy the community life without a fear and violent crime," close quote. Speaker, the government heard the call, and in 2017, the former president of the Republic announced the free education of students with a household income of about 350,000 threshold. This indeed was a victory for all South African learners, for our people's children, in fact, including the Free Must Fall movement, as such, giving the expression to Freedom Charter, and we salute all of these victories. Honorable Chairperson and members, we should not be fooled ourselves about the honorable members and speakers, honorable members. We should not be fool ourselves about what the Constitution states. This Constitution clearly states that everybody is equal before the law. Our Constitution does not call for those who commit violence during the protest shall be given a free get-out jail card. The call by EFF, if it was serious about considering, in fact, it should consider that the Constitution is supreme. Everybody sitting in this House has sworn allegiance to the Constitution, sworn allegiance to protect and support the Constitution. Our law does not allow a special deal for special group. If this were to be the case, then we should have a special deal for hundreds of criminals who systematically engage in destruction of state and properties. Speaker, the law of the Republic must apply to all the people. When we start to tinker around for pardoning and exemptions for this group and that group and that group, we are on the slippery slope for democracy. Let me remind the honorable members of this House why students have been convicted during this protest. They were given the right to protest, the state to freely state their demands. We agreed with their call. What they have done, they were given this right to protest. They banned and destroyed the properties, university properties. They destroyed, they banned the police vehicles. They in fact stoned and did everything that is against the rule of law. Honorable members, the EFF in this House are no longer students. They are here to uphold our Constitution and the law like any other members of all parties represented in this House. EFF cannot go and agitate students, agitate them to take this particular call, including the destruction, and run to the House for the House to protect them.
Honorable Ramatlakane, take your seat. What's your point of order, Honorable Ndlozi?
Thanks, Honorable Chair. The Honorable Member is deliberately misleading the House. This is a PhD candidate.
Oh, Honorable,
the DSG is doing law.
Honorable
You are
Ndlozi,
anti-intellectual.
thank you
How
very
can you
much.
take platform and encourage the country not to start?
Honorable Ndlozi, please take your seat. Let me say that is a point of debate. Thank you. Continue, Honorable Ramatlakane.
Order, Chair.
On what point are you rising, Honorable Member?
On a point of order, Chair. The rule says that you must notify a member when you are going to switch the
Honorable
mic. So why did you break the law
member,
yourself?
Please take
Chief,
your
you are
seat.
student
Please
here.
take your
It's
seat.
only ANC you are
I'm going
not
to
studying.
switch off your mic now.
EFF has
Continue, Honorable Ramatlakane.
Honorable Chair, I repeat, the EFF members of Parliament here are here like any other members of this House to protect and observe the Constitution like all other members sitting in this House. You are not going to be able to go back. You cannot agitate the student to embark on all the dangerous thing and then run to Parliament and ask Parliament to come to your rescue. Let me leave it. Let me ask this question: when will AEFF learn? We cannot go on protecting those who break the law. We cannot go on all modifying errant student who wants to perpetrate violence in the name of all students. The police have to do their job. They have to react on the violence when the violence is committed by all. In this particular case, only 951 students were arrested, out of which 497 cases were presented. Of 360 of them were in fact withdrawn for all many reasons. Only 9 were convicted, with 8 still continuing in court. I want to say to students, we have heard you and we respect your stance on the fee must fall. The majority of thousands of protesters were peaceful. All the universities in the country were peaceful. We cannot allow the violence to be a clarion call for the few. The state will react to violence and tyranny of any reactionary few, the reactionary few. Chairperson, we do not underestimate the resolve of the state to govern on its own name. If you want to break the law, be prepared to do time. In fact, this applies to everybody in society. Violence does not give you the right. If you do that, the best method to deal with this is to negotiate, utilize the skill, demand, and get what you want through the means. And let me conclude. Let me state this clearly. The African National Congress will listen and implement. We will engage, and our government will support our student and other sections of our society with their legitimate demand. We can never make and agree to private deals for those who purport to subvert the hard-won democracy and their will to undo and appeasing the EFF, coming here to appease EFF. We cannot do that. Freedom has cost us and our people dearly. We shall unconditionally defend our freedom. We will not be moved. The African National Congress urges all the people to protest peacefully and with dignity, and include respect of rule of law and respect the people, their life and their property, and do so within the ambit of the law.
Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Chair.
Honorable Gallo.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. The 2016-17 nationwide protests that were sponsored by university students represented the early form of toxic violence at our universities. The chanting of revolutionary slogans and the torching of university buildings became the bulwark of these protests. This approach to engagement was recently dismissed by Professor Xolela Mangu, whose article on Sunday Times lashed out at Professor Bongani Mayosi's tormentors. Professor Mangu concluded that, open quote, "I find it upsetting to hear that students were calling him a sellout, which is also what they did to me when I protested against their rude treatment of Ngugi wa Thiong'o," close quote. Whereas these protests were accompanied by alien conduct to the rules of engagement, it is equally true that they had a semblance of merit. The exponents of free higher education, especially those who were on the forefront, are today petitioning the president of the country for amnesty. This is patently clear that these students are urging us to to read into Sobukwe's letters until we have made sense of their postulations. It was Sobukwe who cautioned that, open quote, tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell a man moderately to rescue his wife from the arms of a ravisher. Tell a woman to extricate gradually her baby from the fire into which it has fallen. But do not ask me to use moderation in a cause like the present one. Close quote. It is this lack of moderation on the part of students that we are called upon today to debate the EFF-sponsored motion, the torching of buildings, the intimidation of fellow students, and the complete negation of the law.
Galo.
Thank you very much.
Pelile isikhathi ba. Mhlonishwa Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Honorable members of this House, my colleague Honorable Kubisa was supposed to have done this, but unfortunately I think he's had a challenge and he cannot get here. However, Honorable Chairperson, as the National Freedom Party, we are very clear on this matter. And one of the most important things is this, and I'm actually surprised that this matter is haven't even brought to this House. Because the first point is, Honorable Chairperson, is this, that in this very House we repeatedly debate on the issue of political parties and politicians not interfering in the rule of law or in another organ of state. Now, whilst, Honorable Chairperson, that we appreciate and understand the challenges that students may have faced in the tertiary institutions, we must also be mindful of the fact that a few people might be protesting. What about the rights of the majority who are not protesting? Now, democracy demands that people must be allowed to protest peacefully, and that is what we have actually provided. But going and torching buildings, assaulting police officers is not acceptable, and it's not the way we are supposed to conduct ourselves. Now, let me add, Honorable Chairperson, that in this very, very House, repeatedly we have spoken about the interference of politicians in the tender processes, in the interference of the state, in the interference of police investigations. But yet now we come here and we ask for the opposite of that, and I cannot understand. For me, that is a high level of hypocrisy. And I think we need to deal with these issues, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, let me also add that out of the total number of students that were demonstrating or protesting, only a handful of them have been charged. And the question that must arise as to why. Now, we must also remember, Honorable Chairperson, that pre-1994, quality education was provided only to a select few. What did we do as government? Despite the fact that many people will argue that we have not done much, a lot has changed in South Africa, and let us be honest about that and admit that, whilst we still have challenges. Now, after having put up these infrastructures to provide a better quality of education, you go out there, you torch, you destroy these things, and then you expect government and the taxpayers, the poorest of the poor who must suffer, must come back and build those things. It is totally not acceptable. So as the National Freedom Party, whilst we support the students in their struggle for a better quality of education to address the challenges that they are facing, we cannot support an interference by any political party or anyone in this House in the rule of law. The law is equal for every one of us in South Africa, and as such, we cannot support this. Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Mbinda.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. As the PAC, we once again stand before this House to highlight an unwavering support for the brave and revolutionary activists of Fees Must Fall. This we say guided by our ideological principle and understanding of the importance of education in the development of a nation. And it is for this reason that we continue to condemn the commodification of education. Education to us remain a liberatory tool that must be made freely available to all, especially the youth, to any nation that is serious about its development. We continue to condemn the double standards by the ruling party as they were with us in calling for free education as far back as the early 40s. Today, we are more than 2 decades into the new dispensation, but university fees continue to rise like any other commodity. The government's intervention in the form of NSFAS continue to be a chain against growth towards these youngsters as it lives with them with unreasonable debts. Student organizations have been in public marches to departments of education and other government offices submitting memorandums year in, year out with no decisive answers from government. It was expected that these students will continue to be agitated as they seem not to be unheard. The rise of the fees must fall movement is a generational continuation of a call that was long overdue on the top of the national agenda. We have students like Okaya Tekesha, Obonginkosi Kanyile, Omaskole Ononguba, who were subjected even to a house arrest because of their call for free education. How do we criminalize these students when we are in agreement that their call was genuine? As a nation, we are still unable to deal decisively with the perpetrators of human genocide during apartheid against unarmed women and children. But we are here today ready to slaughter young students for demanding to go to school. With this, we are not condoning any usage of violence, banning of school facilities. But we are sitting here with people that have committed serious atrocities. And some of these students, they do not even have their grandparents as a result of the evil system, which was declared by the international community as a crime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member Z. Mbele.
Ngiyabonga Sihlalo. In debating the plight of fees must fall activists, we must be clear on 3 things. Firstly, we must remember that we are speaking of at least 3 plights. Secondly, we must not forget that this includes all individuals whose activism contributed to lobbying efforts for a fair deal on higher education funding. And thirdly, we must understand that the mere fact of being in a plight or an unfortunate and difficult situation is a neutral and objective one. It says nothing about the culpability or innocence of those affected until we look at the context of that plight. So, what are the 3 plights of fees must fall activists? When we analyze them properly, we see quite quickly that they are all rooted in the failing state that is the result of ANC misgovernance. The first original plight was the chronic neglect and underfunding of the higher education sector by successive ANC governments, which engendered fertile conditions for the eruption of fees must fall. The second plight was that suffered by many fees must fall activists during the unfolding of protests in incidents of unprofessional or disproportionately violent treatments at the hands of a police service that was and continues to be under-resourced, understaffed, under-equipped, and under-trained to handle public unrest situations. These incidents were flashpoint examples of the general vulnerability faced by students and staff on university campuses when it comes to safety and security of person and property. So because successive ANC governments have, through negligence and mismanagement, allowed the public order policing units to dwindle in numbers, not receive adequate training, and be starved of resources to maintain and upgrade equipment, these units were unprepared to respond to and contain outbreaks of violence, arson, and vandalism during fees must fall protests and subsequent ones on campuses up till this year. As the Police Portfolio Committee heard in a briefing a few months ago, the public order policing units are sitting at a complement of only 5,600 personnel, when the ideal number is approximately 12,800. meaning that these units are operating at less than 50% capacity. How can the ANC government expect our service members in a specialized operational environment like public order policing to be effective and efficient in such an emaciated state? In addition, because of this undercapacity of the public order policing units, it is often the case that station-level personnel have to be first responders to public unrest, for which they are not adequately trained or equipped. It is this ill-preparedness that makes the police prone to rapid escalation of violence and heavy-handedness in these situations, to the extent of using live ammunition, as was reported to be the case at the TUT Soshanguve campus protests that resulted in the death of Katlego Monareng. The third plight is that of the criminally accused and/or jailed individuals. And in each of these cases, the rule of law must be upheld and due process followed. But again, we know that the criminal justice system is severely hampered, owing to our detective service in distress that is overstretched, understaffed, and unable to drive speedy, quality investigations, coupled with an under-resourced public prosecution service. The blame for the mismanagement that has caused all of these problems lies squarely at the feet of the ANC government and its deployment of cronies to state institutions who then go on to undermine their independence and professionalism for the sake of politics and driving partisan agendas. The ANC has proven after 24 years in government that it does not have the political will to make the tough choices needed to get the basics of good governance right. A DA-led national government is the only hope for fixing the fundamentals and turning around our public service to efficiency, effectiveness, and professionalism. Ngiyabonga sihlalo.
I'm now recognizing Honorable Iako, who's the new member sworn in this morning in the Speaker's office, so it's her maiden speech. Honorable Iako. Hayi kahle nimsumthusa msana ukumthusa musha Nkosi yami. Chubeka wena sesi.
Thank you, Speaker. We are not going to entertain debates about the costs of the state brought about by said damages caused by a Fees Must Fall protests, when we are yet to address the true costs of freedom for blacks in post-apartheid South Africa. It is clear that the ANC and the DA are colluding in destroying the future of Fees Must Fall activists. We cannot co-opt a language of free education whilst forgetting the youth that put their bodies on the line to bring these injustices to the forefront. Behind the criminalization, the abuse, the trauma, suspensions, and exclusions from institutions of higher learning. Here we are talking about young people, individuals, and we will tell you their stories. Their stories, we must all acknowledge, are stories of heroes and heroines. Bongingosi Education Kanyele had to stand on his feet preparing to write his final exam in the Durban Westfield prison because they do not have study desks for people waiting for trial. After missing his classes for 6 months whilst in prison, not only did he pass and complete his national diploma in public management and economics from the Durban University of Technology, out of 4 exams that he wrote whilst in prison, he was able to get 4 distinctions. But because of his activism during Fees Must Fall protest, today he is a convicted criminal awaiting sentencing. Amos Amla Monacheng was a second-year informatics degree student at the University of Pretoria. Arrested in 2016, barred from continuing with his degree, and he now sits at home serving a 1-year house arrest sentence. Kanya Tekesha, the first-year media student at Footprint Media Academy, who did not have funds to study journalism at Wits University, today sits at Leeuwkop Prison, serving a 5-year jail sentence. Kanya was a first-time offender with no previous convictions, but now he has a criminal record. Mcebo Dlamini, a law student at Wits University, spent 27 days in jail after being arrested and denied bail because of his activism during Fees Must Fall protests. There are hundreds of others who sit in jail, in and out of court, instead of going to class to write their exams and complete their degrees. People who are accused of rape, murder, and all sorts of serious crimes get bail, but students who protested against high fees, against exploitation of workers, entrenched colonial education at white universities, rape culture, and use of language to exclude and discriminate must either rot in jail or fight all the way to the highest court in the land to get bail. Honorable Speaker, not only have we criminalized and sent students to jail, hundreds are suspended from institutions of higher learning, with some with a lifetime ban. Yolanda Kyanki was expelled from Rhodes University in 2016 and further banned from the university for life. Surprise Silowe, Wandile Masango, Tulani Masilela, Mangaliso Sambo, students at King Sabata Dalindyebo TVET College, and commonly known as Rhodes War Women, and many others were all expelled and cannot continue with their studies. What kind of society do we want when we put excelling students in prison with hardened criminals? What kind of society do we want when we deny students free education, when it is only education that would make adults who can contribute meaningfully to society? We must ask ourselves, Minister, if we continue to criminalize students, what kind of adults do we want the students to be when they leave the gates of prison after 2 years, after 3 years, after 5 years of imprisonment? If we are truly a country invested in freedom for its people, we show it by showing off those brave enough to fight an unjust system will not be in prisons and suspended or expelled for daring to be brave enough to fight for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable
Future
Mkhalipi.
Minister.
Honorable Mkhalipi, ngitocela ke sesi ukuthi uma usewuminductor sisiyabo umfundzise ke kuthi khona bo speaker lo bemfungisa bo deputy speaker nabo house chairperson cha ye bantwa bethu phela siyafundzisa ngithi ngikhumbuta lo sisi lo hlala nabo ukuthi kufanele abafundzise nje kahle. Order, honorable members.
Chair, leave the future minister alone.
Order, honorable member, take your seat. The honorable member was very disciplined speaking here. Honorable minister. Order. Order, honorable Ndlozi.
House Chair, colleagues, before I proceed with my speech this morning, I take the opportunity to align myself with all the colleagues who expressed their profound dismay at the utter lawlessness that prevails in our country. Indeed, the levels of violence have become intolerable, whether they are as a result of some or other form of service delivery protest, and in particular, I must express disappointment from the EFF, Honorable Ndlozi, for adopting a stance that equates the struggle against apartheid through civil disobedience and other forms of undermining apartheid laws, to equate that to the kind of lawlessness that they have been propagating, whether in terms of land grabs and other forms of advancing their policy stances through propagating violence. Indeed, I think it's quite disappointing. But on the same note, let me, on behalf of the African National Congress and government, reach out to all those who suffered harm, sustained injury, or lost property or had their property damaged during these protestations, and indicate that, as colleagues have correctly indicated, it's just a small number of protesters who actively used violent means to air their views. Honorable colleagues, whilst talking about apartheid and its draconian laws, let me invite us to go a little back in history. In 1910, when the Union of South Africa was formed, the white regime of the time, when establishing a new state, had a unique opportunity to build the kind of state which the ANC envisaged, a non-sexist, non-racial, prosperous society in which all South Africans would have a place in the sun. Fast forward 1994, the African National Congress was confronted with a mammoth task of having to respond to almost a century of racial exclusion, oppression, and marginalization that started back not in 1948, by the way, but actually in 1910 when the Union was formed. Imagine 100 years down the line, had the white regime at the time opted to build a nation that was inclusive, where prosperity was shared amongst all, where we would be today. The population census in 1911 said that the South African population was just under 6 million. 6 million. Fast forward 100 years later, we are almost 60 million. That is the size of the socio-economic backlog that the ANC government is confronted today. 10 times higher and tougher than it was 100 years ago. And of course, as if that's not enough, under colonial rule in 1910, the concern was only to address the socio-economic plight of only 10% of that 6 million. Today, the ANC government is confronted with having to address the socio-economic challenges of inequality, poverty, and unemployment of the total population. So there are no comparisons in terms of the task that confronts an ANC government today compared to that which confronted the colonial regime back in 1910. However, honorable members, let me proceed from where we are. Colleagues would prefer to forget that starting with the position of the African National Congress, we in 1955, as the African National Congress, adopted the Freedom Charter, which articulated our policy stance on education by stating that we wanted to ensure that education is accessible to all, and that the issue of economic exclusion should not serve as a barrier for access. We have also understood that the attainment of the goals and commitments of the Freedom Charter was never going to be as simple as preparing a cup of instant coffee. It is a work in progress, and only those who have never had the responsibility to answer to the competing needs of our people in the context of limited resources will adopt a different posture and try to convince our people otherwise. Nonetheless, notwithstanding the dramatic events in the tertiary education space before December 2017, it was precisely for our commitment to uplifting our people that the then President Jacob Zuma announced the implementation of free higher education starting from this year. As honorable members are aware, some of these young activists recently marched to the union buildings demanding an immediate general amnesty from the president. On the instruction of President Cyril Ramaphosa, I engaged with students and agreed on a process of guiding those who wish to apply for presidential pardon and other forms of assistance within the criminal justice system. And let me clarify, as the students themselves correctly acknowledge, at no stage did we promise students that we were going to deviate or undermine the principle of the rule of law. And at no stage did we promise or do we intend to violate the principle of separation of powers between government and state institutions established under our Constitution and the law. And any insinuation to that effect must just be dismissed with the contempt that it deserves. I wish to reiterate what I said in the public statement issued by myself in line with the principle of respect of the principles of separation of powers and the rule of law, that the executive branch of government had neither the mandate nor the inclination to favor any person or group of people with a specific or general reprieve outside the existing constitutional and legal framework provided for under our law and the Constitution. I also categorically made it clear that, quote, presidential pardons are granted in respect of convicted and sentenced persons only on the basis of the information they provide and in circumstances where the applicant has shown good cause. Under no circumstances can presidential pardon be predetermined, end quote. However, the criminal justice system provides avenues for various alternatives to outright criminal prosecution, which include diversion, mediation, and various forms of restorative justice mechanisms, depending on the nature and severity of the offense committed. The affected students fall under the following categories. One, those who are arrested and still in custody or detention, or where their matters are waiting a decision for prosecution. Those that are charged or are awaiting prosecutorial decision, as I indicated, those that are on trial and sentenced, including those serving custodial sentences in a correctional facility. I've undertaken to guide the students in approaching the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA, to consider evaluating each case specifically on its merit in order to determine the seriousness or otherwise of the charges, the weight or otherwise of the available evidence, and where appropriate, possibilities of the options for diversion, mediation, or other forms of restorative justice in the case of those students who are yet to appear before courts in line with the laws of the country. So there is nothing that we have offered to assist the students with that is outside the existing framework of the law and the practices that are applicable. Let me just, for the sake of honorable members, indicate that of the nearly 500,000 matters that the NPA has to make prosecutorial decisions about annually, at least about 160,000 of those are actually dealt with by way of diversion or mediation. So this is not a unique or an exclusive arrangement that is provided for any category of alleged offenders. Furthermore, I will, where appropriate, guide the students in making applications to the NPA for the review of prosecutorial decisions in cases of students who are already charged and whose matters are currently on trial. Let me just indicate here that, of course, once a person has pleaded in a criminal matter, there is no room for diversion because then there is a legal obligation for the matter to proceed to a verdict by the court. The Ministry of Justice will guide the students on the process of compiling applications for presidential pardon for those students seeking to make such applications. And that's the responsibility that we discharge on a daily basis. And on this note, let me indicate, of course, any person who wishes to apply for presidential pardon are at liberty to consult with their legal representatives for assistance. But as the Department of Justice, on a daily basis, we provide free legal guidance to everyone who wishes to apply for presidential pardon or any other form of reprieve in terms of expungement of their criminal record by guiding them as to what information they need to provide, what forms they need to apply, and how to go about it. Because it is our duty as government to provide those services to all our citizens. And this is no exception that we are going to extend these services to the affected students. Honorable members, I would like to explain the process of pardons and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms to clear any misunderstandings that might have arisen or likely to arise in future. Section 84(2)(j) of the Constitution vests power to grant pardon in the President as an executive power. It provides a unique opportunity for people who have been in conflict with the law and have criminal conviction or recorded against their name to have their record cleared and thus start afresh with a clear record. We are aware that a criminal record prevents one from, in some instances, obtaining employment because of the loss of confidence in their character by potential employers. From obtaining visas to travel overseas sometimes, and most importantly, it places a mark against one's name, which is difficult, if not impossible, to remove. The law provides, therefore, some relief in this instance to deserving cases, and I want to underline deserving cases because each case is dealt on its merit, and there is no one glove fits all. In applying for a pardon, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development processes applications for pardons. A guideline has been prepared for members of the public who wish to apply for pardon. A record of the offense or offenses committed to what is referred to as the SAP 69 must be obtained from the South African police. This information is crucial as a full official record of offenses committed as part of the application and has a bearing on the application for pardon. I will refer to this further later. An application form has been prepared by the department as a guideline to applicants. This application form contains information that is essential for the consideration of pardon, such as the nature of the offense, the circumstances under which it was committed, the personal circumstances of the applicant that warrant consideration for pardon, and importantly, references from persons other than the applicant that supports the application for pardon. So it's a very transparent process.
Point of order,
Any
sir.
person has the liberty to avail
Order.
themselves of.
Minister, can you take a seat? What's the point of order?
These members are not listening. Mr. Chair.
Honorable member, that's not the point of order. Proceed, Minister.
On a point of order.
What's the point of order, honorable member?
We only listen to informed perspectives. We can't hear what he's saying because he's waffling. That is why we're busy.
Can you please take your seat, member? That's not a point of order. Minister, continue.
Well, if you're not paying attention, Honorable Shivambu, how are you going to advise your members
Minister,
who
your
may be
time
affected
will be going.
themselves?
Proceed.
In exercising the power under Section 84(2)J, the President must make a rational decision. This means that the information placed before the President must consider all relevant factors about the applicant and the offense committed. The granting of a pardon must be in the public interest. In preparing an application for pardon for the President's consideration, therefore, the process I set out earlier has been developed by the department in consultation with the Presidency to ensure that the process is lawful and fair. The type of information required, such as the nature of the offenses, personal circumstances, assist the President in making a rational decision. What has counted in favor of applicants who have applied for pardon in the past is evidence that the applicant has turned his or her life around and has become a fully productive member of society. Remorse for an offense committed on the part of the applicant is a critical element in the granting of pardon. At times, the national prosecuting authorities' view on a matter is sought. Of course, where a victim supports the granting of pardon, this counts in favor of the applicant concerned. Prior to 2012, a huge backlog for the processing of pardons was created due to the huge influx of applications from persons wishing to clear their criminal records. A quicker and simpler process was required, and therefore the legislature passed legislation to amend the Criminal Procedure Act 1977. Section 271B, amongst others, for example, provides for the clearing of criminal records. This through an administrative process graded by the Director General of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. This has enabled the department to clear the criminal records of approximately 21,000 individuals. So actually there is a system out there that has benefited thousands of people, and it's not a question of dealing with an isolated case of a small group of convicted students. This process applies where 10 years have lapsed after the date of the conviction of an offense, and a person did not receive a direct prison sentence for conviction except a sentence of periodic imprisonment or correctional supervision, or has not been convicted and imprisoned for any other offense during those 10 years without the option of a fine. And this is what we refer generally as expungement, which is dealt with administratively as opposed to presidential pardon. A person does not qualify for an expungement if a period of 10 years has not lapsed since the conviction of the crime, if they were convicted of a sexual offense against a child or a mentally disabled person, if their name is included in the National Register for Sexual Offenses or the National Child Protection Register. They will, however, qualify if your name has been removed from the National Register. Serious cases where the sentence is one of imprisonment without the option of a fine, for example, robbery, rape, murder, and assault with the intention to do grievous body harm, will not ordinarily qualify for clearing of a criminal record, whether by way of expungement. No such cases have ever been considered for presidential pardon by the president. Let me now turn to alternative dispute resolution methods, ADRM as we call it, which encompasses several methods for the resolution of disputes between parties. Within the NPA, this includes diversion and information and informal
Minister,
mediation
your time is
to
up.
ensure that
Thank you very much.
these matters are resolved. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson.
Order, honorable members. That concludes the debate. The Secretary will read the second and third orders of the day.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Environmental Affairs on National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Bill. Second reading debate, National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Bill.
I now recognize the Honorable Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, we move that this House notes concerns raised by the Minister of Environmental Affairs around the substantive nature of amendments to the National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Bill affected by the Portfolio Committee on Environmental Affairs. 2, further notes that the amendments affected to the bill have implications for other portfolio committees and government departments, which necessitate further consultations with all relevant stakeholders. 3, recognizes that the nature of the amendments may require that the objectives of the bill, as set out in the long title and memorandum, may need to be amended, and that the Portfolio Committee may therefore need to solicit further public inputs. Therefore resolves, in terms of Rule 1231D, to refer the National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Bill back to the Portfolio Committee on Environmental Affairs for further consideration and report. I so move, House Chair.
Thank you. I now put the motion. Are there any objections? No objections.
Chair.
Oh, sorry, there's a...
Yeah, Honorable
Honorable
Chairperson.
Singh.
Yeah, we have no objection to the motion that was put by the Honorable Chief Whip of the ANC. But I must say this is a very clumsy way of dealing with legislation in this House. Last week, I stood up here to ask that we put a time frame to this piece of legislation, and we gave a time frame of 7 days. And now we are being told the matter is going to be referred. Honorable Cabinet Ministers would know that before any legislation is presented to a portfolio committee, a subcommittee of Cabinet deals with the principle and the objectives of the legislation. So one would take it that that process has already taken place. But now to be told almost a year later that there's need for more consultation just begs the question whether that process was really thoroughly engaged upon. But however, having said that, Honorable Chairperson, I think this is an important piece of legislation, and we do not need to have any loopholes in environmental legislation, in particular when there's going to be enforcement. So we'll support the fact that the matter goes back to the Portfolio Committee, but this should not happen again, Honorable Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Singh. I'm sure members of the executive have noted, and we appreciate from all parties for agreeing that the matter indeed goes back to the committee. Before I call the Minister for a ministerial statement, I'd like to welcome all our guests in the gallery, and in particular, the Waltateka Primary School from Nyanga East here in Cape Town. You are welcome. Thank you very much. We'll now have the ministerial statement in the name of Honorable Pandor, the Minister of Higher Education and Training, on the developments of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and let me thank Speaker for allowing me to make this statement. Honorable members would be aware that there's been growing public concern at the inability of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to efficiently administer the processing of applications and disbursements. This concern didn't begin this year. They have existed for several years. Public higher education institutions and students are right to be concerned given the important role that the scheme plays in ensuring the transformation of the human resource profile of South Africa. Since its inception, the scheme has ensured that funds are made available to thousands of young people from poor and working class backgrounds to support their access to and success in higher education. Efficient administration and disbursement of the funds are essential to ensuring that young people benefit from this critical support for the skills development of our country. Honorable members are aware that we've had serious concerns about the scheme for several years. In 2013, the new student-centered model was introduced for applications and disbursements. It created a direct link between students and the scheme and yet bypassed institutions. The model was piloted for 2 years in 5 universities and 14 colleges, and then suddenly expanded to all institutions in 2017. At the beginning of 2017, there was a significant breakdown of NSFAS computer systems and processes, and we had to relook at what needed to be done. Various processes of the scheme had to be undertaken manually in 2017, and the absence of data and systems integration worsened the problems. Due to these difficulties, many 2017 processes were incomplete by the end of 2017, and many applications were not finalized, and thus thousands of students did not receive funds in that academic year. The year 2018 began with this backlog intact. The scheme was confronted with inadequate system processes, and staff had to administer the new full bursary program, which introduced fee higher education for poor and working class first-year students, in addition
to the backlog. We began to work closely with NSFAS from early January in an effort to address the changes and to deal with the backlog of 2017. The board also provided extensive hands-on support to the scheme to help address continued inadequacy. In March, I was alerted to the backlogs and the fact that many institutions had dipped into their own funds to give students minimum allowances and thus were owed by the scheme. And thousands of applications had still not been processed. It became clear that the problems were extremely severe. Following various board attempts to intervene and assist, and even support from my department, we agreed with the board that extraordinary measures were warranted. I appointed a team made up of DHET and institutional staff for a 6-week period to support the processing of applications and ensure disbursement. The team worked with the board and made some progress in resolving some of the backlog. However, it became clear that this was not enough of an intervention. In July, I directed the board to take additional measures to address the 2017 backlog and to finalize 2018 applications. I was not satisfied at the responses I received from the board, and after the board chair informed me of his immediate resignation, I decided to seriously consider the appointment of an administrator. I called an emergency board meeting which affirmed my intention. The board asked me then to appoint an administrator, as had already been asked by unions represented in NSFAS, as well as by student organizations at TVET colleges and in universities. In late August, I appointed Dr. Randall Carolison as administrator for 12 months. I've directed that he should urgently ensure eligible students receive funding for 2017 and this year, and that he should develop a viable plan for processing applications for 2019, plus ensure stability and efficiency at the scheme. We have secured staff secondments from universities and TVET colleges to support him. He will add to this support team as the work progresses. There's been positive progress in the first 2 weeks of administration. Links have been re-established with all institutions, and institution heads and student leaders have played a critical role in communicating with students. And I want to thank all student organizations at our TVET colleges and universities for the leadership role they've played. Over 50 NSFAS staff have been deployed to be on site at institutions to ensure resolution of outstanding issues. I was shocked to learn that they identified 50,000 students who fit the NSFAS criteria, but were not on the system as applicants or beneficiaries. Thus far, 17 billion rand has been disbursed, and 275,000 new students and 243,000 returning students have had their funding confirmed. I'm really happy that we've recorded significant growth in TVET college-funded students. However, the change that has emanated from the administration has also pointed to the critical need for more support to be provided to TVET colleges to develop systems and capacity for student financial aid administration. I wish to assure honorable members that the matter of the executive officer at the scheme is one that will be addressed by the administrator and not by the minister or the department. The immediate work of the scheme is to continue closeout of the 2017 and 2018 funding cycles and to open 2019 applications, and we have done so successfully. We will then focus on systems and processes that will create an effective model for the future. We've announced that from 3rd September, new applicants should apply to the scheme for funding. And 30th November, honorable members, will be the closing date for applications because we want to begin the 2019 academic year with students knowing whether they will be funded or not. We've also requested universities and colleges to ensure students apply and to support NSFAS in the turnaround. I seek the help of all parties in the House in getting the around 34,000 TVET college students who've not signed their statement of particulars to do so, because they are not going to receive funding if they do not sign those forms. Once the immediate challenges have been fully addressed, the administrator will focus on identifying the root causes of problems at the scheme and developing solutions and a roadmap to address them. We anticipate a significant business redesign which should be put in place during the 29 academic year period. The steps taken by the administrator thus far have signaled that it will be possible to achieve significant improvements in his 12-month term of office. And I hope honorable members will support both the scheme and the administrator and department in executing this important work. I am pleased that students in our universities have begun to benefit from the 2.2 billion rand that has been disbursed in the first 8 days of administration. Colleges that now have confirmation of confirmed applicants are able to disperse the upfront funds that we had made available to them. And so students now have resources in their hands, and we will continue to ensure that the funding that our young people should have gets to them and supports them to succeed academically. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Minister. Order. I'm sure honorable members have noted the closing day for NSFAS. So when you go back to your constituencies, please remember for the academic year 2019, it's opened already, closing date 30 November 2018. Honorable Pozzoli.
Thank you, Minister Pandor, for your decisive action and clarification on the state of NSFAS today, and your hoped-for improvements in this complex and until now failing system. We in the DA have been highly vocal in calling for NSFAS to be revamped and for bringing the attention of the broader public to the plight many students have found themselves in. For months, we have pointed out that tens of thousands of students have remained without the funding recklessly promised to them by President Zuma at the end of last year. And for months, we have seen how NSFAS has proved barely able to respond. We are particularly concerned about the fact that a lot of the problems seem to have arisen from the mismatch between the systems in NSFAS and those in universities and colleges. This is a hugely frightening bureaucratic mess which will be extremely complex to undo. It is very similar, in my view, to the case of the mismanagement of certificates in colleges, a problem which was similar and which has taken 4 years at least to begin to solve. We can only hope this does not happen in this case. So it's our fervent hope that your plans will come to fruition and NSFAS will become the smooth-running machine our students deserve. We will be monitoring it carefully. However, there is another matter of considerable concern to students and NSFAS which needs airing, and that is the long-term sustainability of the scheme of fee-free higher education itself. There is a very grave risk that the students of the future might find themselves with inadequate support, even if NSFAS becomes as efficient as Amazon or as smooth-running as Alibaba. And this is a widespread concern amongst universities themselves, expressed by the Vice-Chancellor's Association, Universities of South Africa, which has spoken of this worry frequently. The problem is we are trying to operate the most generous higher education system in the world in one of the most desperate and failing economies in the world. Our system is the only one in the world, to my knowledge, which pays for all the costs of all the eligible students. Other fee-free systems, such as Brazil, New Zealand, Germany, Scotland, and others, only exempt students from fees themselves. Here, students have their fees, accommodation, food, and other expenses fully paid for, with no expectation of having to pay any of it back, even if they obtain an extremely well-paying job after their studies. This means that the system is enormously expensive. 58 billion has been set aside for it over 3 years, but our prediction is that this will not be sufficient, as students of all years of study will join the system over time. Paying for multiple years at once will be an entirely different story from paying or not paying simply for first years. In 6 years' time, the fund will be paying for students in every one of the 6 years of study it takes to do a medical degree, for example. And since higher education inflation has been calculated at 8% per annum, these ever-increasing costs will be compounded above inflation. We predict that it will become absolutely impossible for the scheme to continue for more than 5 years, as our economy flounders and doesn't seem to be able to be rescued. A crisis, we think, will develop in the funding scheme. We cannot afford fee-free higher education this generous over time. An alternative, less onerous system has to be developed eventually. How will this crisis manifest itself? In 2 ways. Student grants will not be sufficient to cope, and it is very likely that university grants will have to be cut to pay for the difference. This is precisely what's happened in New Zealand, for example, and that is a country with a very strong economy compared to ours. It has also happened in Scotland and elsewhere. As the costs of free higher education went up in these places, so the payments to universities went down. This has meant that the universities have had to take drastic steps to find the alternative funds. In Scotland, they have admitted increasing numbers of foreign fee-paying students to the point where non-fee-paying Scottish students cannot find a space. And in New Zealand, serious concerns have been raised about the quality and stability of universities. If the government believed, when it introduced it, that fee-free higher education would prevent protests in universities, sadly, I believe that this too is not sustainable. In fact, the amounts granted by NSFAS are modest and unlikely to increase with the cost of inflation. I predict further protests to enlarge the scope of the grant pretty soon. So this discussion relates directly to the discussion earlier today, the students' use of violence on campuses to blackmail universities and the state to concede to their demands. What we are seeing here is the future elite of our society capturing through violence enormous amounts of funding for themselves, funding which has been paid for, by the way, by raiding the budgets for the very poorest people, housing and basic education. So NSFAS is struggling to administer a system which cannot be sustained, which was ill thought through, and which was imposed on us at shockingly short notice by an outgoing president who had overseen the decay of higher education over the period of his tenure and who was desperate for a populist measure to keep up his support. We need to see a sober evaluation of these facts by NSFAS, as well as a rapid improvement in its systems and processes for the sake of our students of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member Ntlangwini.
Thank you, Chair. NSFAS is broken and nothing the ministers say can change that. Students and the EFF of this House have been telling the ANC government for years that NSFAS needs to be fixed and that it's on a brink of collapse. But because the department does not listen and has done nothing, students are living in misery and are left in desperate situations, Minister. Minister after minister have come to this House and give empty promises. At universities, TVET colleges, across the country, students are suffering as we speak. They sleep in libraries and squat where they are 3 or 4 in a room, putting female students at danger of sexual violence. We are sending our girl child every time to these universities at the risk of being raped. Only 3 weeks ago, students were kicked out of residence at UWC because NSFAS had not made payments. Students eat nothing but bread and chips because they have no money and because NSFAS allowance comes late. They share textbooks and on many occasions have to make copies because textbooks are too expensive and they can't afford it. You have backlog stretching from many years, Minister, meaning students who were meant to have 2017 fees paid by NSFAS still haven't been seen their fees being paid. Instead of helping students, NSFAS have become a problem in every step of the students' lives. But NSFAS isn't just a bad management system. NSFAS is flawed as a system. You know, Minister, and you know that we know, Minister, that the DG of the higher education has been using NSFAS as a fundraising tool and deployed his comrades of the SACP into that board, and nothing has been done about that. You cannot study if you do not have a dry and safe place to stay, food to eat, and study material. But for many students that get NSFAS allocation and allowances, the funding they receive is still not enough because there's no student accommodation available with the allocated budget because campus foods are overpriced by all of this capitalists. NSFAS have also created space for corruption and abuse. Go to any university or TVET in this country and the students will tell you how university management misuses, withhold, steals funds meant to be given to students. There is no coordination between the credit management offices and the NSFAS national offices. With universities blaming NSFAS blaming the universities while students get lost in the system, simply don't get the funding that they duly deserve, Minister. That is a sad reality for students using NSFAS or students trying to get NSFAS, and it paints a picture of a broken system unable to meet the needs of students. We are yearly sending our students to these institutions and they don't get the funding that they need. We don't need promises anymore, Minister. The only way to forward is to free education, higher education for all. And only then we will have an education system that allows students to get an education and finish their degrees without being burdened by cost of fees, accommodation, food, and study material. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member Ngwezi.
Thank you very much, Honourable House Chairperson. The effective administration of NSFAS remains one of the key critical areas of the education system in this country, particularly for the poor. Therefore, the interventions that the Minister has reported back today are a welcome step in sorting out fundamentally what has been a systematic rot over a long period of time, which has characterized NSFAS. The system has been riddled with inefficiencies and ineffectiveness and has been largely unresponsive to whom it is supposed to benefit, which is the poor. The emergence of the fees must fall movement was as in part a result of an NSFAS system which did not go far enough with dealing with the issues of the student education and access. The board has dismally failed, and we hope that the interventions of the Minister in this regard will correct that. On the 10th of August, the IFP stated that while we welcome the appointment of an administrator, arises out of the fact that we called for the dissolution of the board and the appointment of an administrator. Moving forward, Honourable House Chairperson, the NSFAS must be decentralized to universities for effective and maximum use, but also NSFAS must be seen as a social grant, and there the department must work with the Department of Social Development for the purposes of concurrence and the purposes of plugging the holes of corruption where unintended recipients find themselves at the forefront of the list, while those who need it most don't get it. It must be part and parcel of the broader change as we seek to turn around NSFAS. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member Sekiman.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair. Honourable Chair, Minister, it is quite clear that the administration of the fund leaves a lot to be desired. And this appears to be an ongoing problem for many, many years. As a result of the poor administration, many students suffered and continue to suffer Honorable Chairperson and Minister, we must not also forget about the challenges that we had identified a while ago in terms of the collection, and where we found that we were collecting under 10 or 12% of the loans of what we were giving out. And we found that something needs to be done drastically about that. So I think that's one of the issues we need to talk about. But added to that, Honorable Chairperson and Minister, is the issue of the curriculum. While we as government are allocating a whole lot of money towards NSFAS and bursaries, we also appear to have a shortage of skills in the country. And we're finding repeatedly that the curriculums, particularly our TVET colleges, are not speaking to the skills needs. So while we're talking about high unemployment here, we are talking about skills shortage here, and we're finding there's no coordination between the departments. So we are asking the Minister to also intervene in them. We welcome the intervention by the Minister, the Honorable Pando. However, Honorable Chairperson, the backlog together with the current applications, which is increasing at an alarming rate, means that drastic measures must be taken to identify what the weaknesses and the challenges are. And again, we come back to the same thing. There's never been consequences for failure from members or officials to comply or to deliver to us. And I think the time must come is where you need to investigate this thing thoroughly, and those that are failing us must be dealt with accordingly, and they must be replaced. We must put capacity so that we don't have. Now, many of us are arguing about free and higher education. Honorable Minister and Chairperson, yes, free education must be provided. That is not open for discussion. Maybe the timing was incorrect. But I don't believe, Honorable Chairperson, the issue is actually the money. The problem that we have here is the way this fund has been administered. So the intervention by the Minister is already yielding some results. So I think what we should be doing is giving full support to the Minister in terms of an intervention to ensure that the students receive their allocations timeously, because many of these students are either not getting enough money so that they cannot buy food for themselves on a daily basis. They cannot have transport. They're suffering in terms of the accommodation. But as the National Freedom Party Chairperson, what we are saying, rather than concentrate on the problems, let's concentrate on the solutions, together united in this house, rather than coming here and trying to grandstand and score points. Let us work together with the department, with the intervention by the Minister and my colleagues from all different political parties, so that we can find a meaningful, permanent solution to this problem. Thank you very much.
Honorable Filtani.
From the outset, let me confirm that the UDM supports the intervention and the efforts of the Minister. But we'll take just one step back, Honorable Minister. The root cause of the system's failure lies at the absence of an effective and efficient monitoring and evaluation system, both on the part of the board as well as the ministry itself. I will not say anything about who was at the helm of the department at the time. Consequence, poor students were exposed to unnecessary anxiety. This on top of the expected anxiety on whether one will pass the exams or not, if admitted. This begs the question, did the personnel employed to process the applications have the necessary capacity to do what they were employed to do in the first place? Would implore you, Honorable Minister, to check into that. We appreciate the steps that you are taking to correct things, but you need to check deep into that. This country cannot and should not rely on crisis management. The students are there to learn, and they learn beyond what's in the classroom. Soon, the students will think that crisis management is the standard way to run an institution, because they can see what's happening, they read newspapers. Imagine what would have happened to the future of the 50,000 students had this intervention not come about. We should not toy recklessly with the future of our youth. We wholly support your intervention and hope that it will indeed brighten the future of our youth. Thank you.
The next speaker is the Honourable Carter.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, we note the Minister's statement, and there's appreciation for wanting to correct what has been wrong. In our opinion, the genesis of this problem is the following. The general incapacity of NSFAS, which is synonymous with a growing incapacity of a state as a whole under the rule of the ruling party. The appointment of a non-profit, and the appointment of a non-fit-for-purpose CEO who lacked the ability, integrity, and ethical morality to head the organization. It could have been a non-profit, that's correct. The blunder to centralize all student financial aid under NSFAS administration, despite the organization's lack of capacity and credibility, and Zuma's unilateral decision to implement free fee higher education without any consultation with Cabinet and the then Minister of Education in an attempt to sway the ANC's elective conference. Now, Chairperson, the fact that the organisation had 153.8 million more cash left than projected at the end of 2017-18 financial year is indicative that fewer students received funding that should have. Now, Minister did give an explanation of the challenges that they faced, but we question and would like a reply from the Minister as to why 1.7 million rand offer was made to the NSFAS CEO, Stephen Zwane, to resign when he faced allegations of inaptitude, maladministration, corruption and manipulation of procurement processes, and also misleading the board. Why do we continue with these practices of rewarding and enriching wrongdoers when we should be disciplining them? Minister, we're really looking at you, and we are quite sure that in your department that you will stop this type of behavior. The Congress of the People believes that the predicament we find ourselves in can be alleviated by decentralizing the administration of financial aid to those universities and TVET colleges that have a capacity to do so, ensuring that student financial aid results in the development of skills that are actually needed for our development, inculcating amongst students that access to financial aid comes with conditions as well as responsibilities, and realizing that the fee higher education was a reckless decision that remains unsustainable to the fiscus without radical, and by that I mean substantial, economic growth. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Chaisa.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. As AIC, we welcome the statement by the Minister of Higher Education and Training, so as to know what is going on in this NSFAS issue. Because the NSFAS issue has been a great issue that is affecting our children. We hope that this time around, this strategy will bring in the efficient administration for the processing of applications and the disbursement of funds. We were always concerned about the fact that most of the people, the professionals, that is teachers and nurses, are not in a position to send their children to university because they are getting nothing. But they also belong to the so-called working class. I don't know how this matter now can be resolved. They've got a problem. We say, Mr. Pando, you keep it up because we're all waiting and looking forward now to this intervention. The standard model did not work very well. So it is good now that you decided to appoint an administrator that is going now to look thoroughly in the issue of NSFAS. The finalization of applications and the disbursement of funds will be done now with great ease. So these processes and systems now should be efficient enough so that they work towards the aim of helping our students. Again, this NSFAS board that was very much dysfunctional, that it has got to be now replaced by this administrator is going to help us a lot as a country. We are also happy that there's going to be efficient communication between NSFAS institutions and the students, because the students now would like to be informed all the time so that they know exactly what is it that is happening, whether they are going to get these funds or not. So addressing these challenges and identifying the causes or the root causes of this will also help the country. We are just aspiring, Honorable Minister, to free education for all. That we need to work hard so that we grow our economy. So helping poor students from the working class will also bring a solution to the challenges that we are facing as a country. Because these students now, in the long run, will work for the country and contribute to the growth of the economy of the country. So you keep it up, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is Honourable Mbinda.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. Once again, as the PAC, we continue with our call for a free and socialist education to be offered in all our academic institutions at the state cost. This we can achieve with a restructured economic framework that seeks to guarantee our full control of the means of production of this country. Chairperson, NSFAS was supposed to be a temporary relief while government was looking into a sustainable funding model to offer free education. Over 2 decades since the 1994, a sustainable funding model to offer over 2 decades since 94, government of the ANC continue to witness increments in the cost of education. Chairperson of the session, as the PAC, we are of the belief that time has arrived that we take decisive economic decisions so as to offer to our nation services such as access to free tertiary education. It cannot be that we continue to pride ourselves with indebting our young students, as this is an impediment of their growth and development financially. As a nation, we are decades into a new dispensation that is supposed to be people-orientated, and this requires drastic change in how we do things, as NSFAS is one of those that needs to be dealt with to open way for the ushering of a free and socialist education. In its current form, the NSFAS continue to be a milking cow for retailers like Pick n Pay, Spars, etc., because students are buying meal cards to use. They have got meal cards to use for meals, only to find that these shops allow students to purchase items such as alcohol, cigarettes, and so forth. This chairperson puts our students in an unreasonable debt that makes it difficult for them to respond to socio-economic challenges faced by their families. We are saying, as the PAC, at least we should do away with the centralization of NSFAS. And then students should apply in each and every year, more especially a year before. There should be a system, obviously, to track students that are already getting this kind of support. And then all the above should be done, more especially for those who are doing matric, first-year students. All this must be done, more especially during the year they are finalizing their matrix. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable September.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, of course, as the ANC, we welcome the statement that the Minister took the House into confidence today to give us a better idea of the path that we have traveled, both in the committee and the department, on the aspect as it relates to student funding. We all know, honourable members, that the National Student Financial Aid Scheme plays a very critical role to ensure that students receive their much deserved funds from the entity, and of course the need to ensure that the poor can equally, and this is one of the main things that has to be understood in this debate, is that the need to ensure that the poor can equally gain access both to colleges and universities is what NSFAS is all about. We should therefore, honourable members and Minister, never get into a situation where the NSFAS mandate is not upheld, and we will continue as a committee to hold them to account to make sure that all those issues that we continue to raise with NSFAS and with the department are being addressed and are attended to. Indeed, we have experienced that there has been a continuation of the problems, and none of them are related to the fact that the fee-free education was introduced. The student fund model is something that comes on since 2015, 2016, and of course, if we go back to all those issues, we think it is worthwhile in this entire process, whilst the administrator is there, to deal with a range of things that have been pointed out at that time already, so that we put to bed all the issues that were and are there. But we think it's important, honourable members and Minister, to, as we move forward, we trust that the student model can become a model that is embraced by everyone, a model that makes sure that the entire higher education community can take ownership of, and a model that unites everyone in the sector to make sure that their interest is the interest of students also. The challenges that both the universities and the colleges raised with us, we think is important to be dealt with also, relates to the never-ending IT system that is not integrated, and we think it would be worthwhile to make some investments to ensure that we have a proper IT system that remains in place, connected to everyone. Minister, the funding for students that are living with disabilities cannot be forgotten in this entire debate. They have pleaded with us at many institutions on several occasions that theirs must also be attended to. Students with disabilities also has to be fast-tracked. We can't leave them behind. They require especially different devices, which they don't always have. And they also have the right to fair chances of success alongside with everyone else. We must remain thankful for the commitment when all the parties appeared before us in the committee to say that they are committed to help to improve the entire system, and that they will unite around the progress that they are making also, Minister, around this, and we will continue to urge them to do exactly that. Each one of them has a responsibility in the entire system with NSFAS. But we also think as we move forward and towards the 2019 opening, the framework that brings together free education together with a moral duty of why we have decided to have free education, we think it's important that we make sure that this framework can be implemented and that this policy can come before us, so that we do not have a lacuna before us when it's 2019, that why do we have free education and a range of other things has not been addressed. We should also, honourable members, applaud the position that the South African Union of Students have taken, where they will be embarking on a nationwide roadshow, and this nationwide roadshow is to ensure that the commitment that they've made before us, that students will prepare themselves well, equip themselves well, and make sure that they live up to ensuring that the 2019 application are also being met by them in a responsible manner, And we think it is a very good idea that they are doing a nationwide road show. Free education, honourable members, was not imposed upon us. Free education is indeed a policy of the African National Congress, and free education must be accepted in a manner that we have done, and that is that the ANC will always look at what are the needs of poor people in this country. But we must ask everyone in this House if they know, honourable members and Minister, of anyone that are doing any corrupt practice in NSFAS, such as what has been pointed out, that apparently the DG did this, that, and the other. We must ask everyone in this House, they know where the police station is and they know where all the relevant places are, that if they suspect anything, then it would be correct not to use this podium only, but to make sure that they can bring these matters to where they really belong, because it's really wrong to say that the DG has employed all sorts of people onto the board, as if the board does not have a policy on how they need to do. Of course, honourable members, radical socio-economic transformation, building human capacity, fighting unemployment is why the ANC support free education. We support it for the poor. We make sure that the ability to learn and to develop cannot only be measured by social status. Being poor should not be a barrier to education, and therefore introducing free education speaks to the ANC policy of recognition that we address poverty-related matters to students also. We call on students to use the progressive government policy as a lever and a catalyst to bring about change in this country. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Minister of Higher Education and Training.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and could I thank all honourable members who've participated in the debate that followed my statement. I thank them for their contribution, and I certainly will consider the advice they have provided seriously. I wish to just respond to one or two of the comments. Honourable Bazoli is right. We are seeking to address the certificate problem. It's an ongoing one, a big challenge that we must resolve. We have made inroads, and I think there's been progress. On the matter of the sustainability of the scheme, clearly this is a matter that our government must pay close attention to. We are committed to providing free higher education to young people, and we therefore must devise a sustainable program that will ensure that over time we are able to fund as many young people who come from poor and working class families. I do think we need to address the matter of the block grant to both universities and colleges, because there's been a reliance on tuition fees, which are very high, for many, many years, and it is due to inadequacy of the subsidy to institutions. I think we must continue to engage, and will, with student organizations to ensure that they understand the commitment the ANC government has to ensuring that those who are in need of support receive support, and this is the poor and working class students. I assure the Honourable Ntlangwini that I do not stand here to make empty promises. I have taken action. I am working closely with the administrator, and I believe from what has been achieved in the first period of his appointment that indeed the Honourable Ntlangwini would be convinced when next we debate the matter that progress has been made. I know a number of the members of the former board, which is now dissolved, and most of them, as far as I know, will be horrified to be labeled communists. So I found that one interesting. I might also say If indeed something has been done wrong, I'll be keen to get a report as to that wrongdoing by any of my officials. With respect to students and their being kicked out of accommodation, if I could be provided with the institutions and the names so that I may engage the institutions and see whether there's a way in which we can assist those young people. I assure the honourable member of the IFP that the board is now dissolved. Once an administrator is appointed, Honourable Ngwezi, there is no longer a board. And so that one is done, and it's sealed, and we now have the administrator executing both management and process and executive obligations. Honourable member from COPE, I really don't wish to deal with a staff matter at a podium in the House. I indicated that this is something the administrator will address, and I think, Honourable Carter, it would be very poor of me to begin to talk about separation deliberations between the administrator and the chief executive of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. So I hope you will understand when I don't go into this matter substantively. I thank the Honourable Filtani for his support, and indeed I agree with him. There's a need to address monitoring and evaluation and strengthen our capacity in that regard. I also agree, I think crisis management is a very bad form of management, and that normally what you want are institutions that function maximally, and that is the kind of system and institution I hope we will build for the future. I assure again, Honourable Carter, that the ANC government is not incapacitated. We do have ability, and certainly we are functioning in many, many areas, and we will continue to do so. The matter of the surplus she referred to of 2017 is being disbursed as we speak, because we are addressing the legacy issues as well as this academic year. Again, Honourable Nchaisa, thank you for your support. I also hope that the intervention will work. In fact, not hope, but I'll work hard to ensure that we succeed. Honourable Mbinda, we are implementing free higher education. We said it will be incremental over 5 years. As to socialist education, I think in the awards that you win in 2021, do introduce it. That's a brilliant idea. We never established NSFAS as a temporary scheme. We did have a temporary agency called TEFSA, but NSFAS is a statutory body established to oversee funding for students who are poor and in need of financial support. And finally, I agree with the Honourable September that more attention must be given to the desperate plight of many students who have disabilities. And I assure her that in terms of allocations we've made through the University Capacity Development Grant, that attention is being given to providing improved support to young students, young persons with disability in our institutions. Finally, we also are ensuring that we have a very vibrant and robust communication campaign so that we don't have 50,000 students on our campuses who did not know that they could be beneficiaries of the scheme and thus should have applied. We will work hard, honourable members, to ensure that the administration we've put in place succeeds in building a strong, efficient, and viable National Student Financial Aid Scheme institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. And that concludes the responses to the statement. Honourable members, I will now suspend proceedings until 2 p.m. and wish to remind you that the fourth order will be taken at 2 p.m. this afternoon. The bells will be rung to alert members to the resumption of business. Business is now suspended.